Welcome to the Woman's Connection. I'm Barrie-Louise Switzen, your moderator. The Woman's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned?
Welcome. The subject we're going to talk about today has been around since mankind of Adam and Eve. And yet, there's still a lot of mystery surrounding it. To demystify a lot of this, I would like to welcome Susan Quilliam to talk about the joy of sex. Susan, welcome.
Thank you.
Susan, you were asked to update this groundbreaking book, The Joy of Sex, in 1972. How has things changed since then?
There have been so many changes. In 1972, it was just post-pill. We had just realised that it was possible to divide sex from conception. So there was an optimism around that sex could be totally pleasurable. In the 40 years since then, the science has changed, the social context has changed. We now live in a fully sexualised society. And I also have to say that the early optimism has gone. We now know the dangers of sexuality. So there were many changes that needed to be made to the book.
Susan, you said there was a lot of dangers, or there's a lot of dangers now. How so?
In the 40 years since the original book, we've learned about sexually transmitted infections, which the original author Alex Comfort hardly knew anything about. We now know that it isn't possible to simply sleep with somebody and then walk away, or very rarely. Sex creates a bond, and so it's very disappointing if a sexual relationship doesn't work out, if our lover falls for somebody else, or indeed if we have sexual problems and we can't fulfill the promise that we once had.
Well, I know when I moved to New York in 1979, Monday morning everybody was talking about Dr. Ruth. Dr. Ruth, did you hear what she said last night about sex? I mean, she was all over the radio. And I think she transformed a lot of this, so it became more open, but I think it's still shrouded in secrecy. What is your feeling?
Sex is still absolutely shrouded in secrecy. Alex Comfort originally wrote the book because his patients, as a general practitioner, his patients seemed to know nothing at all about how to do sex. I work as an advice columnist. I get thousands of letters a year from people who don't know how to do sex. And in my radio program, which I do once a week, I get 2 solid hours of people saying, but I'm not enjoying sex, or I don't know what goes where, or when I find something, what do I do with it? So yes, there's still an awful lot of ignorance, and the sexualised society hasn't helped.
Do you find that it's the young people, 20s, 30s, or even the 60s?
All age groups have their own gaps in knowledge. Youngsters maybe don't know what to do. Recent research suggests that the 40-somethings, maybe coming out of a divorce, don't know that they need to protect themselves. The highest rate of sexually transmitted infections is in the 40-plus age group. So we all have our little blind spots around sexuality.
Will you say most people who are getting divorced at 40 and up are kind of ignorant about sexual transmitted diseases? And I heard the fastest growing rate of HIV is among seniors.
Yeah.
How can we prevent a lot of this?
It's really important for all age groups to be knowledgeable about sex and about the dangers of sex. By that I don't mean that we should forget the joy of sex, but protection, protection, protection. Even if you've been faithful for the last 30 years, the partner you're sleeping with may not have been, and it only takes one to pass on an infection. So yes, knowledge and action.
Well, when you say you want to use a condom, is it the man who says no, or is it the woman who you find says no more?
I think both partners are wary. You know, a condom does slow things down. It's not as spontaneous. But in general, both partners need to take responsibility. The woman should suggest, the man should suggest, and present that as what is always done. Nothing personal. I'm not accusing you of having an infection. I just always use a condom.
Well, what about testing for HIV first if you have a partner? I mean, you've been dating this individual for some time. You know, you want to err on the safe side versus the bad side. Do you bring up, let's get tested for HIV or any of the other diseases, or does that really put the kibosh on a relationship?
It's always a good idea a few months down the line, when you know that this relationship is going to be stable, to suggest that you both get tested. Again, just as a matter of course, it makes everything so much easier and so much more joyful when you don't have to use protection. Of course, you may well be using contraceptive protection as well, but going to get tested is very easy, very straightforward, and it means you can both heave a sigh of relief and relax.
While you've added things to the book, what did you find that you had to remove that became outdated, and what did you replace it with?
The book itself, from the 1972 version, the new version is about a third as long again. So I added lots and lots of things, new science, new cultural contexts, even new positions. There have been new positions invented since, you know, the 1972 version. As to removing sections, there were a few that had to be removed simply because they were silly. There was really no room for the chastity belt anymore. And there was no room for sex on a moving motorcycle or sex on a moving horse, because it's not only illegal but very dangerous. But there were also lots of sections that needed to be rewritten, because Alex Comfort was writing from a male perspective 40 years ago. And little comments such as, well, a woman who's frigid is simply nervous, just have no place.
Would you say that women are more aggressive in a sexual relationship now?
Women are certainly taking the lead more. One of the reasons why the publishers asked me to do the book was they wanted a woman's perspective. Alex Comfort sadly died in 2000, and they were looking for somebody to rewrite it, and they thought, yes, a woman, because women are taking the lead. Women are much more sexual decision makers than they ever were back in the day, and women are enjoying themselves more. We're having more orgasms, we're having more pleasure.
How do you define the joy of sex?
Defining the joy of sex, an amazing question. I think it's about being sure of yourself and what you want and what you don't want in sex, and being accommodating and respectful of your partner. Once those two are settled, and once obviously contraception and protection are taken care of, you can simply relax and enjoy. And the enjoyment is about connection. It's about connecting with a partner, learning what they want, having them learn what you want. It's not just about the orgasms, not just about the sensual pleasure, although it is both of those. It's also about that feeling of personal connection between you and another person.
Well, how do you start? I mean, let's say you're in a new relationship, and sometimes the men are, well, they're in their 50s and they're having erectile dysfunction. How do you handle something like that? And they're afraid to make the first move.
What I always say is make friends before you make love. There's no point in just jumping into bed with somebody, not only because you may feel bad about it afterwards, but also because it often doesn't work, and it certainly doesn't work nearly as well as if you know that person and you can talk about things. With the particular problem of erectile dysfunction, the really important thing for a woman is not to take the blame and not to dish out the blame. It isn't his fault that he can't get it up, but almost always it's not your fault. Almost always it's nerves, it's performance anxiety, or, with the older man, it could actually be that there's a health problem. Once you get to know a man well, if he's still having erectile dysfunction, you've got over the nerves, you're enjoying yourselves, but there is still a problem. The most loving thing you can do for him is suggest he goes and has a medical checkup, because we now know that 70 to 80% of older men's erectile problems are down to physical problems, diabetes, heart disease, and that needs checking out. You could do him a real favour by encouraging him to go to his general practitioner.
That sounds easier than said than done. Because so many men, oh, there's nothing, it's nothing, and they've got this whole big persona. I guess it's taking him by the hand and leading him to the doctor to get a physical checkup.
Taking him by the hand, leading him to the doctor, telling him how much it would mean to you, and reassuring him that erectile dysfunction doesn't mean he's a failure, doesn't mean he's not powerful. It means probably that there's something wrong and it can be fixed. Men like to know that things can be fixed, and if you present going to the doctor as a solution, he's far more likely to listen to you.
All these sex toys shops opening up across the country. There was a woman who opened up one in California, and she's got branches throughout the country. And it seems like she's doing quite a bit of business. Are people more into, is it kinky stuff? Is it sexual stuff? Pleasurable? How is it defined, and what's the difference between the different kinds?
Sex toys are definitely up and coming. Many sex stores, many sex toy websites. They're not kinky, they're an added possibility. And I would say particularly for women who find it difficult to have an orgasm, using a sex toy, using a vibrator is a very, very good way to learn about your body, to learn about what works for you. There's a whole range of sex toys. Online it's very easy to check out what's possible and experiment. Buy just one thing, see if it works. The best websites, the best sex stores will talk things through with you. They will be prepared to discuss what your needs are, what your partner's needs are, and work out something that will give you pleasure. And remember, it's a sex toy. This is not serious business. Play with it and enjoy it.
Is there a particular procedure or a map that you could develop for your body and your partner's body so that you're both comfortable in exploring, or is it just come hither or there?
The first time you're with each other, you'll probably just be overwhelmed by being with each other. But after that, it's always a good idea to map out what works and what doesn't. You know, explore, touch, lick, and see what gets a response. Go back and check. Do something again. Does it get a response? But remember that for women in particular, it will change not just month to month, not just time of the month, not just pre and post menopause or pre or post your period, but also from minute to minute. What works one time may an hour later feel uncomfortable. You may want something completely different. So school your man in exploring and playing, and of course what that does too is sex never gets boring.
With everybody on the go so much, especially here in Manhattan, and there's so much traveling, you don't always have a good connection with your partner. Is there a way to keep that bond going while you're traveling or apart?
Obviously, be together and talk together on the phone, on email, on text if you can, to lay the foundation for sexuality. But use that phone and that text and that email to talk sexually as well. We'll all have our own different styles. Some people prefer more overt style, a more open style. Others will have pet names for body parts. You'll develop your own codes. But it's a wonderful idea to text your partner in the morning as you leave for work, or as you're coming back from work, to say, yeah, I still love you and maybe this is what we'll do tonight. It's great to keep the communication up, particularly in these busy times.
Have you found one particular thing that works the best as far as keeping in touch? It could be phone, presents, gifts, notes.
Keeping in touch, you will all have your different style. Some people who like voices more will respond to the phone. Other people who like to see the written words will want a letter or an email that they can keep. But it's always important on a regular basis to give gifts, and they don't have, in these economic crisis times, they don't have to be expensive. You know, a single flower picked on your way to work, you know, one wonderful chocolate bought on your way to work, a back rub, a bubble bath, you know, run a bubble bath for your partner and just show them to the bathroom and leave them alone to soak. They'll invite you in later if they feel in the mood.
Are there particular ways of showing love?
This is the map. Research has suggested that there are 3 ways of showing love that really work, and that is words, actions and commitment. So keep saying that you love each other, or that you fancy each other, or that you still want each other. Do actions which might be sexual, giving your partner a wonderful time in bed, or putting the rubbish out for them, or putting the cat out so that they don't have to bother. And then commitment. Once you get to that stage in a relationship where you know that you care, be prepared to make that commitment. Write it down, say it, but let your lover feel secure. For women in particular, research suggests that the way to an orgasm is to feel secure. The more secure she feels, the more orgasm she will have.
Single women in this country, that to find a man that's compatible, even for one night stand sometimes, is difficult. What do you suggest?
I think it's perfectly permissible and actually a very good thing to provide pleasure for yourself. All the research suggests that a woman who self-pleasures is more able to have a loving relationship with a partner. Find out what works for you. Touch, explore. Yes, use sex toys if you want to. Take your time. Don't necessarily read books, but you can for ideas. Just explore your own body. Find out what works for you. And remember that penetration may work for a man, but it doesn't necessarily work for a woman. The outside rather than the inside is often what works for us.
So how do you satisfy the man while he's trying to satisfy you, but yet it's not working for you?
There's a very good argument for dividing your lovemaking into he pleasures you, you pleasure him. And then when you found that out, when you've explored and you've learned and you've played, you can bring the two together. Of course it's fine to have intercourse, and you know that's the peak, that's a wonderful bit. But it's also fine to do other things, maybe with your hands and your mouth, to let him do those to you, and to take it in turns so that you can concentrate completely on your pleasure, and then you can concentrate on him.
There's a lot of pornography on the internet, as well as internet dating. How dangerous or safe is that?
The internet is one of the big changes since the original Joy of Sex book, and so I had to devote a lot of time to it. And I'm actually a great fan of the internet. It allows people to communicate all over the world, to begin relationships all over the world, but it does have its dangers. What we find is that if you meet somebody online, you tend to be very open with them and they tend to be very open with you. Dating websites, or whether it's just through a chat room or a message board, it can be dangerous because you get very intimate and very open very, very quickly. And then, of course, there's internet pornography. One of the things that worries me enormously is that in this sexualized society, there are so many negative images, particularly about women. A recent television survey showed that adolescent boys in particular are getting a lot of their messages about women's sexuality from porn. And that means that the messages they're getting are totally inaccurate and often very harmful. The other problem, of course, is if your partner is using internet porn. It can be addictive. If he's feeling tired, if he's feeling stressed, if your relationship is not as good as it could be, he may turn to internet porn because it's easy, it's straightforward, he doesn't have to try, he's pleasing only himself. And you do need to challenge this, and that can be hard. You know, he may resist. But stating firmly that you are not happy with this and that you want to put energy into rebuilding your relationship is the only way to go. If a man drifts off, or indeed if a woman drifts off, down the path of only getting their pleasure from internet pornography, it's not going to spell a good future for your relationship.
Let's say your relationship is on the rocks and you've tried just about everything and he's still fixated with the pornography on the internet. Is this going to last? Do you go to a marriage counselor, or do you just say, okay, you know, you've tried enough to get him to focus back on you. All these other factors are not coming together. What course of action would you suggest?
If you've explored everything, and that includes going to counselling as a couple, and indeed going to counselling yourself, not because you have the problem, but because you need support, then you have to look at it this way. It is as bad as if he was unfaithful to you. He is being unfaithful to you by turning to the internet rather than turning to you. The trust will be gone. And then you may have to make some very hard decisions. Of course I can't say leave. There may be children, there may be economics involved, but if a man is turning to the internet and you have asked him to stop and you have done everything you can to make the situation better and to re-engage him, then you have to see it as actually a deal breaker, and you may have to make some very hard decisions.
Going back to the fact that you say it can be very dangerous for pornography on the internet, what about children, the young children? You're talking teenagers getting a slanted view of sex. What about the younger ones? Are they like the 8, 9, 10? Are they also on the internet looking at sex?
Lots of children do surf the internet, and that's why it's important for parents to put in place the right technical solutions. Sex education is always better done in the family or by a supportive school context, because you're not only teaching the biology, you're not only teaching, what happens, much more importantly you're teaching the values of sex, how special it is, how powerful it is, and how it's going to work much, much better in a special, powerful relationship. So whatever age the child, be that 8, 9 or 16, 17, it's much, much better if they have had their sex education through the family, in conversations, or through a supportive school environment.
I remember, now this goes back a number of years, my father was very open about sex, and my mother was, but that all came from where they grew up. And now, fast forward, I was talking to one of my friends, and her son is in an, not advanced, her son is in an accelerated class situation where he's with a lot of older people. And I said, well, have you talked to him about sex? And she said, no, I just can't. I said, do what my mother did. She went to the library and took out books about the birds and the bees. And I was like 7, 8 years old. I mean, she's talking about a son who's like 10 years old. At what time do you really start educating your children about sex so that they don't get distorted views and they feel comfortable about their bodies?
The child themselves will put up signs that they're ready. They may ask a question, or they may mention something that's happened at school that one of their friends has said to them. And it's at that point, whatever age the child is, that sex needs to be introduced. Only ever answer the questions that are asked. You don't need to lay the whole thing out. But if you can set up a situation where children are talking to you honestly and openly at 7, 8 or 9, then they will be able to talk to you honestly and openly at 12, 13, 14. In fact, they may by that time be so secure in what they know that they don't need to talk, and they can stand up to the playground myths or the net surfing that they're doing. But in my mind, it's not a question of have that conversation at 12. 12 is probably 3 or 4 years too late. They will have been hearing things from friends way, way before that. And they will be bringing those back to you and raising flags and asking questions. That's the time to talk to your children about sex.
Is it possible to become addicted to sex and that's all you really focus on yourself, in a relationship?
There are various addictions, and there is certainly sex addiction. That said, I think the term sex addiction can be used as an excuse. Oh, I can't help it. I can't help sleeping with other people. I'm addicted. But there certainly can be a situation where people are more focused on sex than on relationships. And that is very often due to upbringing and background and experiences. We are finding some evidence of biology, but it's largely psychological rather than physiological. And therapists can help as long as the person owns up to what's happening. Just like an alcohol or a drug addiction, they need to be clear that this is what's happening and that they want to sort it.
There are so many books about sex around. Why do we need another one?
There are so many books around and there are so many images around. But in our sexualized society, the very fact that there are so many means that many are inaccurate, they're harmful, unhelpful. They give us wrong images of sex. What the publishers wanted, and what I hope I'm delivering, is an accurate, sensible, joyful, inspirational, as well as informational guide to sex. The Joy of Sex is a brand everybody knows. It's a term everybody knows. Everybody has their own Joy of Sex story. And so hopefully, when people want information and inspiration, they'll turn to this book.
In the closing moments of the show, what would you like to leave the audience with?
One of the things that I've really learned through rewriting Joy of Sex is that we live in wary times. We live in times when the joy in sexuality can have disappeared for us, either because we live in an over-sexualized world or because the joy has gone out of our own sexual relationship. What I'd most like to leave the audience with is a real plea. Get the joy back in your sex life. Enjoy yourselves. Sex is wonderful. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, for joining us today. And if you have any questions, feel free to write either Suzanne or myself here at the Women's Connection, and we will get back to you. Look forward to hearing from you. Bye now.